In 2006, Square Enix announced that it had been laying the groundwork for Final Fantasy XIII to become a franchise in and of itself. Under the banner of Fabula Nova Crystallis, two other flagship games were being developed alongside 13. A game called Final Fantasy Agito 13 would release on the PSP, and one called Final Fantasy Versus 13 would certainly release not too long after 13 proper. All of the Fabula Nova Crystallis games were delayed. Agito released 5 years later in 2011 under the name Type 0, and Versus 13 morphed over a decade into Final Fantasy 15, and even then was arguably never completed. Combine this with Final Fantasy XIII's less than perfect fan reception, and this new sub-series was not off to a great start. But Final Fantasy XIII's modern reputation is in stark contrast to the numbers surrounding its release. The game reviewed well and sold millions of copies in its first month alone. Despite the large subset of fans who hate the game, 13 was a hit, and at the time, it was the only sign that the Fabula Nova Crystallis project might succeed. It's in this context that Final Fantasy XIII-2 was released. While the other Fabula Nova projects were alternate takes on 13's core mythology, 13-2 is a direct sequel, featuring the same cast, locations, and gameplay. Doubling down on 13's sales success was a logical move considering the troubles the other projects were going through, but doubling down on 13 as a game, as divisive as it was, would be difficult. Making the same kind of game again would further alienate fans that hated 13's first-person shooter-like, cut-out-the-fat take on a JRPG. Making a wholly different game would be an insult to those that did appreciate what 13 tried to accomplish. Game director Matomu Toriyama and his team would try their best to thread the needle between these two camps, delivering a game that is simultaneously an apology for 13's detractors and a thank you to its fans. Final Fantasy XIII's strengths and weaknesses stem from the same thing: a focus on a precisely tuned and curated experience that left little room for player agency. Trim level design kept the pace brisk, but often made the game monotonous. A largely predetermined number of encounters made sure the player's power level was exactly where the developers wanted it, but made the premise of RPG leveling feel superfluous. Jumping perspectives kept the story engaging, and allowed the developers to highlight each possible combination of party members and roles and how the player must use them, but made the first 20 hours feel stunted in its gameplay. If 13-2 was to be an apology, it needed to preserve those benefits while cutting out the detriments. Luckily, it wasted no time letting the 13 hater know, hey, we heard you, and we did everything we could to make this more to your liking. After a brief but exciting introduction, the player takes control in a small town, with NPCs to talk to, side quests to undertake, and an area just outside where enemies randomly spawn and allow the player to grind. Right away, 13-2 quadrupled the JRPG-ness of the trilogy, putting its best foot forward on delivering the main thing people thought the first game was lacking. Leaning in too hard to the apology would risk insulting the people who actually liked the first game, and that is something the story seems like it might be doing at the outset. You guys didn't like the characters because Lightning was too mean or Hope was too whiny? Okay, got it. You don't play as them anymore, and most of them will only be brief cameos. You thought the Fal'Cie and l'Cie terminology was too confusing? Fine, that stuff is nearly scrubbed from this game, despite being the foundation for much of the setting. Thought the ending was unsatisfying? Then it both didn't happen, and it did, and this game will be entirely about what's up with that. The biggest red flag that this story might insult fans of the first game is its core concept: time travel. Time travel is a really fun idea to play around with in a story, but dropping it into an existing story is dangerous, since it can undo consequences or erase whole chunks of the narrative. When it becomes clear that 13-2 is all about time travel, there's an immediate worry that it will try to course-correct the 13 trilogy by walking everything back. That worry doesn't end up being justified, luckily. The time-traveling narrative proves to be an exciting, unexpected turn for this world that feeds into the core themes that 13 established from a different angle. It does take a while to get to that point, though. 13-2 begins 3 years after the first game's ending. Humanity has started to build a foothold on the hostile planet of Pulse, forced to flee Cocoon after it fell from the sky. The Fal'Cie have been dealt with, and thanks to the sacrifice of Vanille, Fang, and Lightning, the future of humanity is up to humanity. But wait, Lightning didn't join those two in their sacrifice. She was freed from her crystal prison like the others and reunited with Sarah at the end of the last game. So why is everyone saying that Lightning is still trapped in the crystal pillar supporting Cocoon? The only person who remembers Lightning surviving the events of the first game is Sarah, and on top of that, she's having visions of her sister fighting in some giant unknown city. No time to dwell on that though, because a meteor crashes into the settlement of New Bodom, monsters attack, and a man from the future comes to help. His name is Noel, and he tells Sarah that he was sent by lightning to take her on an adventure to save the future. That's all a lot, and a huge departure from the first game. It's almost funny how quickly the established lore is tossed aside for time-hopping hijinks, but at least it hits the ground running. That's about as much story as you get for the first third or so of the game. Events do unfold, but they're more bite-sized and self-contained. Answers to things like what happened to Lightning, or why Sarah has her visions, or how all this connects to the first game are saved for much later. Burying the lead on the tie between 13 and 13-2 is kind of genius in a way. Many of the most common critiques of 13 don't hold water when you look at the game as a whole. The terminology isn't impossible to grasp, the characters only start off grading so they have satisfying growth, and the gameplay requires so much more than matching the auto-battle option. It just takes time for those things to become clear. Those that didn't have the patience for it, or who was so turned off by the first half, need 13-2 to prove itself right away. So much of this game's first few chapters is focused on proving the dev team took 13's criticism to heart, that pleasing the fans needs to come later. If they had the patience to stick through and enjoy the first game, they should be able to stick through this one for their payoff. This need to be upfront with its changes to the formula means 13-2's structure is much different from 13's. Rather than a hyperlinear series of areas in which we see all the distance the party travels, 13-2 is the exact opposite. Sarah and Noel travel through different places in different time periods, hopping between them at their leisure. The Historia Crux menu lets the player choose where they want to go, and it actually is a choice, usually. 13-2 is so committed to non-linearity that it lets the player tackle different areas in whatever order they choose, opening branches that end up often being entirely optional. It's possible, even likely, that you'll see the introduction for Part 2 of Episode 3 before seeing Part 1. The levels themselves take 13's hallways and bend them into a loop, offering dense, explorable areas filled with collectibles, optional quests, and unique encounters. It's especially impressive how they're able to give each area its own flavor of exploration and progression. Brescia Ruins, the first proper area in the game, is the most complete and diverse. It has a town of characters to talk to, complete with a shop, dangerous ruins, and an underground lab area. Challenges range from battles to exploration to even some light platforming. Though not every area is as varied, the other levels all put their own spin on things. Erebba requires extensive use of your Moogle companion to navigate. Yashtress Massif is crawling with overpowered enemies that can only be avoided by staying in the light, and the Archlight Steppe is an open hunting field with different biomes and weather patterns that affect what creatures you encounter. It might seem odd to take note of such basic things as each level is unique, but it's such a stark contrast to the first game that even things that are standard in games as a whole feel novel. Hopping between times and places keeps things fresh in a similar way that 13's rotating perspectives did, but the game that 13-2's structure has most in common with is Kingdom Hearts. Just like Kingdom Hearts, 13-2 follows a small core group as they wander between worlds chosen from a menu, searching for a missing person. Each world, or place in time, introduces smaller, episodic stories that the heroes will help resolve before leaving to continue their search. Kernels of the main plot are found throughout, but it's not until the last third or so that it all coalesces into something coherent. Final Fantasy XIII tried so hard to reimagine what a JRPG could be in a modern, action-packed context. Final Fantasy XIII-2 seems to realize that Square Enix had already successfully done that with Kingdom Hearts. With the lack of focus on the main plot, it becomes readily apparent that the side content forms the bulk of what the game has to offer. Throughout the game, there are 160 collectibles called fragments for the player to find. Fragments condense all content into a single, trackable number. You earn them from completing quests, both mandatory and optional, you find them in hidden nooks and crannies, and you get them from interacting with interesting sites. Whenever you jump back to the Historia Crux to choose an area, a tracker in the top left always lets you know how many fragments you have and how many there are left to find. It's great to always have access to a things you have left to do meter. Most fragments don't involve that much to get, but it's still quite impressive to reach the end of the game and see you've only earned 1/4 of them. The episodic structure means that the primary through line between parts are our protagonists. Rather than a party of multiple people, 13-2 only has 2 playable characters throughout its runtime. The first of these 2 is Sarah. She's Lightning's sister, engaged to Snow, and spent the first game trapped in Crystal. Saving her was the main motivation for her sister and fiancé, and the death of the Fal'Cie restored her to life. She hasn't gotten to spend the 3 years since in happiness, though. Her sister seems to have never survived the fall of Cocoon, though she remembers reuniting with her. Snow believed his fiancée and left her behind to go find out what happened to Lightning himself. All of this has left Sarah feeling like she is once again some helpless creature that needs people to do things on her behalf. She seems to enjoy the village of New Bodom, but there's a hollowness to her happiness. The mission to save Lightning comes at the perfect time for her. Finally, Sarah gets to take charge and help someone else for a change. For most of the game, Sarah is fairly vanilla as a character. She's kind, compassionate, sure of herself, but not overconfident. Sarah can be summed up as pleasant, her better qualities not shining too brightly, and lacking negative qualities to give some depth or contrast. For most of the game, anyway. Noel, on the other hand, is more plainly interesting. Noel is the last human on the planet. He comes from the absolute end of the timeline, having seen his small village dwindle down to nothing one by one. To make it worse, his one purpose in life was to protect the Seeress, a revered figure in his culture. This was something he couldn't do, her death being the last thing he experienced in his own time. Noel was able to voluntarily jump back in time through one of the gates the duo uses throughout the game, his one goal being to avert the very future he is from in order to save humanity. This is clearly the setup for a dark, brooding, edgy character, but Noel does his best to keep that part of him at bay. He puts defense of others at the top of his priorities at all times, though not to the detriment of self-preservation. He's focused, but he's able to loosen up and keep conversation light. He is, much like Sarah, pleasant. His scars just bear themselves more often. His self-worth is low, feeling like a failure for letting the Seeress die, and his worldview often clashes with those who haven't been through as much as him. An excellent example of this is in the Sunleth Waterscape. After jumping through a few different times, the duo happens upon Snow, himself having been traveling through time to find Lightning. It's a nice reunion for the engaged couple, but Noel doesn't take to Snow very quickly. Snow is as self-sacrificing and reckless as ever. It's almost like he's praying for a grenade to jump on top of sometimes, just to prove he's a hero. That trait makes him endearing, it's part of why Sarah is with him, but also a source of constant worry for her. Noel doesn't see the virtue in Snow's attitude. Having lost not only everyone he ever knew, but simply everyone in the world, Noel knows that trying to be a hero when it's better to run will just get you killed, and you're a lot less helpful to others when you're dead. Snow can recognize that fact, but he simply is who he is. If something needs to be done, he's going to be the one to go do it, no matter how dangerous it is. Noel comes to respect Snow's mentality, but the two never truly reach an agreement. It's interesting to see Noel, someone who instantly got along well with Sarah and many others, clash against someone that's so important to her. A reminder that no matter how well he blends in, his world is truly unlike the ones they travel to. The Sunleth episode pits Snow and Noel as these two opposing men in Sarah's life, two men she has grown close to and been protected by. One of the most refreshing things XIII-2 does, though, is not position Sarah and Noel as romantic interests. Sarah is engaged to Snow, and Noel clearly has feelings for his Seeress. The two foster a close relationship with each other that never crosses that line of friendship. It's rare to see such platonic relationships between men and women form over the course of a story, especially if that story is exclusively the man and woman traveling together with no other companions. Well, to be 100% accurate, there are other companions, but the Moogle doesn't count and the others only factor into the gameplay. XIII-2 largely preserves the unique paradigm combat system 13 introduced, with one very large difference. Since Sarah and Noel are the only party members in the game, there's an open third slot in combat. That slot is filled with monsters. Much like a Pokemon or a Shin Megami Tensei or whatever monster collecting game you prefer, you collect enemies that you battle and are able to have them fight for you. Rather than catching them during battle, there's a chance you will earn a crystal after winning a fight. That crystal will give you access to a new creature that you can add to your roster. Each monster comes with one role that they specialize in. Having your third party member only be able to use one role would be very limiting, so you can pick your 3 favorite monsters and put them in your Paradigm Pack. If you, for instance, have a Medic, a Ravager, and a Saboteur in your Paradigm Pack, you can build your paradigms with those roles in the third slot. When you shift paradigms in battle, your monsters will automatically swap in and out to match the role you designated. Each creature also comes equipped with their own Crystarium, the upgrade system that was also carried over from 13. One Ravager creature might develop its stats and abilities differently from another, so it's always good to experiment and upgrade new monsters to see if they're more to your liking. They also have traits like Late Bloomer or Peaks Early, meaning that one might be subpar until lots of resources are put into it, while another will seem overpowered at first but quickly outlive its usefulness. The system has real depth, and even if getting into the intricacies isn't necessary to beat the game, there's a lot to dig into for a player that loves optimization. On a grander scale, the monster collecting gels really well with 13-2's side content-driven structure. There's always more monsters to collect, making battles feel worthwhile to a max level player that's chasing 100% completion. The Paradigm Pack is a big change to the battle system that fits this particular game, but there are other, smaller changes that smooth some of the edges and speed things up. The first would be, well, speeding things up. The ATB meter charges faster in this game, meaning that attacks come out more often and battles are shorter overall. In 13, having a synergist cast haste on your party at the start of every battle became a must later in the game. Having that extra speed be standard across the board is a good call. The haste spell is, in exchange, missing from this game, but you still get hasted if you manage to get a preemptive strike on an enemy in the overworld. That usually means standard battles go by even faster. One of the few popular criticisms of 13 that I agree with is that battles took too long on average, so these touches go a long way. The biggest improvement this sequel makes to the gameplay would have to be the streamlining of items and equipment. 13 tried to do a lot of changes to JRPG items. It made consumables more rare, made accessories a stand-in for armor while still being accessories, and made weapons into subclasses you upgrade instead of tools you swap out when you find better ones. That weapon upgrade system really was the linchpin of the whole thing, and it did not work. The idea of making each weapon viable specializations is fine, but the way you upgraded them to keep them strong enough was obtuse, to put lightly. The tight balancing of the game also required items and upgrade components to be rare. This had the knock-on effect of making the scoring system superfluous. The idea was that you'd get a star rating of 1 through 5 for each battle depending on how well you did. The better you did, the more likely good items will drop. But drops were still so rare that getting 5 stars rarely gave you anything, hampering the incentive to earn that rating. 13-2 takes the most obvious route to making this better. Ditch the weapon upgrades and make more items drop more often. Weapons have been reverted to their more classic form as things you replace over the course of the game. There are still weapons that give unique buffs, but these still have better variations you buy later. Upgrade components still exist in the form of monster upgrades, and since you will collect so many monsters, and they need so many components to level, the game doesn't need to be as stingy with them. Earning 5 stars on a battle feels as satisfying as always supposed to, when you earn a good chunk of upgrades and maybe even nab a crystal to summon a new monster with. Improvements notwithstanding, I can't say 13-2's combat is better than the first game's as a whole. Making combat faster and simplifying items is a straight up improvement, but the changes to fit the game's structure leave it feeling like a side grade rather than an upgrade. 13 waited a long time to let the player take the reins of their team, but when it finally did, there were many options at their disposal. 6 party members, each able to use the 6 roles. Each party member developed the roles differently and had their own strengths and weaknesses. A team with Fang on point as Commando and Sentinel would feel different with Snow in that role, and would feel much different from a team where Lightning led, swapping out Sentinel's tankiness for extra stagger as a Ravager. While everyone did have their specialties, you could still mix and match different compositions to find the arrangement you like best. That freedom isn't present here. The dev team made sure to open up the paradigm system early, letting players use half the roles right away and level them up freely. That freedom, though, is more surface level than anything. When it comes down to it, Vanille is better with magic, and Noel is better at physical damage and has more health. You're gonna make Vanille your medic and more than likely make her your Ravager due to the more plentiful magic-based attacks in that role. Noel will then have to take Commando, and is the more obvious Sentinel due to his higher base health. Vanille gains access to the Saboteur role first, and excels at it, while Noel does the same for Synergist. The end result is character progression that, ironically, feels more prescribed than it did in 13. With the main duo's roles mostly set in place, the only thing that offers the same level of customization are the recruitable monsters. Whether or not their inclusion is a plus or a minus is really up to the player's tastes. Someone who loves collecting or simply having little creatures they can name or dress up will probably be very happy with the Paradigm Pack. For my taste, though, I would have preferred to have a few extra standard party members. I love having options, but when there are too many options, I tend to just stick with the one thing I know works. A normal JRPG would give enough variation to experiment with, but not so many that I wouldn't bother. It would also free up Sarah and Noel to specialize different things without each having to take their designated half of the roles. Taken as a whole, 13-2's gameplay is a different flavor of the 13 combat system rather than an improved recipe. It puts the familiar ingredients to better use, but the bolder choices might not be as palatable to everyone. It leaves the paradigm system in an unfortunate place where there's no definitive take on it. No idealized game that offers the depth and customization of 13 with the quality of life changes of 13-2. The third game in the trilogy, Lightning Returns, veers off to be its own unique beast, and with Square Enix's more recent attempts at making Final Fantasy an action RPG being more successful, it's unlikely that they will return to this misunderstood gem of a combat system. The decision to make gameplay the same but different may have had mixed results, but that same approach is used in regards to the story, and in that arena, it's shockingly effective. The ways that Final Fantasy XIII-2 revealed its story to fall in line with the first game are more subtle, being more thematic than literal, but end up more satisfying than direct connections likely would have been. It really does feel like the game is veering off into completely unrelated territory for most of the games, though. The focus of the story is on strange temporal phenomena, with elements of one time appearing in another. Things appear from the future that alter the past, creating paradoxes that Sarah and Noel need to fix. The cause of these paradoxes is a mystery, but it becomes likely that the goddess XIII has something to do with it. XIII has a domain over the unseen world, essentially the afterlife of this setting. Her exact provenance is murky, but it seems that her connection to the afterlife gives her some control over fate, and by extension, time itself. XIII was only briefly mentioned in the first game's data logs, so it may feel odd to shift focus to her, but the fact that gods beyond the Fal'Cie existed was a late game reveal. Having the sequel move past the Fal'Cie only makes sense. To elaborate more on XIII and her role in the plot requires discussing a whole other aspect of the story, its villain. The man at the heart of 13-2's narrative is Caius Ballad. Caius is from the same society as Noel, serving as guardian to the Seeress while Noel trained to take over for him. This Seeress, named Yule, earned her title for her ability to see visions of the future. This is a blessing given to her by XIII herself, and as her guardian, Caius was imbued with XIII's own heart. The trick is, Caius is hundreds of years old. When he first received the heart of the goddess, it was a gift to ensure he could protect the Seeress throughout all of time. His immortality became more of a curse than a blessing. Indeed, he could protect the many Seeresses throughout time, but that also meant he had to watch them all die. The future sight they possess is also a mixed blessing. The toll seeing the future takes on their body is great, and as such, every Seeress dies in their teenage years. Caius lived to see the end of humanity, his village dwindling until it was just him, Noel, and Yule left. He yearned for an end to his purgatory, so he asked Noel to kill him. Noel only knew Caius as a mortal and as his mentor, so killing one of the only 3 people left in existence was never an option for him. Knowing no one else would grant his freedom, and that Yule would soon die like the others, Caius formulated a plan to put fate under his control. If seeing the future is what killed the Seeress, then killing the future should keep her alive. This is where the story finally starts to connect to Final Fantasy XIII. 500 years in the future, the crystal pillar that holds Cocoon above the planet will start to crumble. Cocoon will then crash into Pulse, destroying the heart of human civilization and putting humanity on the path to extinction, a path that concludes with Noel. Saving the pillar is not an option, and holding Cocoon up some other way also proves to be a dead end. Sarah and Noel learn this and are able to go back to the past and warn everyone, opening the path to a third option that could actually save humanity. The leader of the world, Hope, comes up with a new plan. Oh yeah, by the way, Hope grew up and turned out to be an ingenious engineer who ended up becoming the head of society due to his intelligence. He also preserved himself throughout time so he could reawaken when needed and guide humanity to safety. Anyway, Hope begins a 100-year project to build a new Cocoon, an ark that can float above Pulse with everyone inside of it. What seems like a triumph over inevitable extinction turns out to be the final step towards it. When someone dies in this setting, a gate to the afterlife opens to take their spirit. When a lot of people die at once, the gate that opens needs to be bigger. These larger gates risk some of the afterlife seeping out into the real world, causing chaos and throwing off the balance of things. If chaos escapes entirely, the 2 realms blend into a state of stagnancy. Time halts completely, people become immortal, and the fabric of the world is broken forever. So, if literally everyone died, a gate would be created that is so massive, the end of time would be certain. This is precisely what Caius is counting on. His plan is to crash the new Cocoon into the planet the day it launches, killing everyone aboard. With that many deaths, chaos will spill out, and the unseen and the seen realms will merge into one, ending time once and for all. Caius has mastered and memorized the flow of time, engineering things precisely to lead to this end. The only thing that Caius didn't have a hand in was the ending of Final Fantasy XIII. Yes, finally, the game loops back around to explaining what happened to Lightning and how the l'Cie were freed from their crystal prison at the end of the last title. Etro witnessed the party's struggle against the fal'Cie. Moved by their courage and determination, Etro altered fate itself so these l'Cie would avoid the eternal stasis that comes with fulfilling their focus. Altering the timeline had its consequences though. Just as everyone was reunited with their loved ones, a rift in the world opened up and swallowed Lightning. The rift brought Lightning to Valhalla, a kind of limbo between the visible and unseen realms. This is where Lightning has been for the last 3 years, fighting to protect Etro from Caius. Once the gate closed, time adjusted itself to a world where Lightning was gone, altering everyone's memories to match. Everyone except for Sarah. Her memories remain intact because she is, in fact, a seeress. She sees visions every time the timeline changes. That explains why she saw things throughout the game, but it also means that she's going to suffer the same fate as Yule. Each vision takes a part of Sarah's life away, a realization she comes to before Noel or the player. Despite this, she never changes her pleasant attitude. She knows exactly what continuing her adventure will lead to, but carries on anyway to serve the greater good. This extra wrinkle to her story complicates Sarah enough to make her a memorable character instead of merely a passable one. It especially means that Sarah deserves to be the main character and poster child of this game. Unfortunately, Square Enix had already decided that Lightning would be their mascot for the 7th console generation. Lightning's prominence in the advertising of this trilogy is really perplexing. With how hard she was pushed by the company, everyone thinks she's the main character of these 3 games. Final Fantasy XIII didn't have a main character though. It was an ensemble cast, and if I had to pick a singular one to label as protagonist, it would have been Vanille. Lightning has maybe 15 minutes of screen time in XIII-2, yet her face is on the cover of the box and on the front of the store page. She's even on the title screen alongside Caius. No Sarah, no Noel, all Lightning. It's one of the most blatant examples of marketing and favoritism affecting a series that I've seen, and it's only slightly improved by the fact that Lightning actually is the singular protagonist of the final game in the trilogy. Still, it feels disrespectful to Sarah and Noel for them not to get the spotlight they deserve. The final level in the game, Academia 500, feels like the biggest course correction from 13 in the whole game. It is an intricate, sprawling, proper JRPG dungeon. Puzzles, mini-bosses, hidden items, the whole deal. Rotating platforms require some platforming to navigate, switches to be pulled, and maps to cross-reference. More than any other part of the game, this level feels like a call-out to 13. I couldn't help but be reminded of the labyrinth of moving platforms that Snow enters at the start of that game, a massive puzzle room that turned out to be a few straight hallways with the switch at the end. Academia 500 fulfills what that cop-out promised while still feeling like a proper culmination of 13 itself. At the end of the labyrinth, Caius begins his attack on the new cocoon. Sarah and Noel confront him, while Hope and Saz, who magically appears after being trapped in a casino the whole game, do what they can to launch the Ark and save Vanille and Fang from the collapsing pillar. It wouldn't really be a JRPG if you just fought Caius here and saved the day though, would it? After an initial encounter, Sarah and Noel are brought to Valhalla for their final battle with Caius. This final battle is more like the first game than any other, a long endurance battle against a multi-headed behemoth that will take anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes. Climactic for sure, but I didn't miss the stress those prolonged battles gave me. Nonetheless, the duo defeat Caius, and the villain urges Noel to kill him once and for all. Here, the player is given a choice: kill Caius or spare him. The choice doesn't matter, because Caius forces Noel's sword into his chest, finally freeing himself from immortality. Caius' plan to end time with genocide has been thwarted, and the heroes return to the world of living to celebrate a new home for humanity. Just as a triumphant ballad begins to play, Sarah collapses into Noel's arms. They stop Caius, changing the timeline away from extinction and prompting one last vision to hit Sarah. It was one too many. Sarah promises Noel that they will meet again before she dies in his arms. Before anyone has time to mourn, the sky turns to a bleak gray to match the sky of Valhalla. A gate opens and chaos pours out, consuming the planet. A cut to the throne of Etro reveals that Lightning is encased in crystal, perhaps reverting to the fate Etro had altered. The screen fades to black, and the words "to be continued" appear on the screen. The end. A man who has mastered the timeline as much as Caius would never allow a situation where he failed. Caius was given the heart of Etro, the source of his immortality. Killing him is killing the goddess. He may have preferred to survive, but one way or the other, Caius ensured that chaos would take over. There was never any chance for the heroes to succeed. Caius's plan mirrors the plan of the fal'Cie in 13. Killing the villain only played into their hands, but neglecting to act would result in the deaths of millions and the villain succeeding anyway. At the end, 13-2's final and most important tie to the first game becomes clear: the shared theme of fate's inevitability. Final Fantasy XIII had a beautiful marriage between story and structure. The hallways and constant forward progression aligned perfectly with the futility of the l'Cie struggle against their fate. There was no chance to divert from the task they were given, so the game doesn't let the player either. 13-2 proves the same point from the opposite end. The game offers so many routes and areas and side objectives, letting the player drive their own adventure and do what they want, but the result is the same. No matter what you do, no matter what order, no matter how much you did, Caius wins. The true ending, achieved from unlocking the other similarly dour secret endings, is a fourth wall-breaking speech from Caius where he tells the player he will always win. Did you expect the true ending to fix the problems for everyone to end up happy? That was never going to happen. Caius made sure of it. Final Fantasy XIII took all decisions out of the player's hands to drive home the power of fate. Final Fantasy XIII-2 gives you all the time and choices in the world to prove that inevitability even more. That theme resonates with these two games literally as much as it does narratively. Even with all critiques taken into account, all the tweaks made to improve upon Final Fantasy XIII, the end result of 13-2 is the same as the first: a good video game. 13 has its faults, but they are outshined by the bright innovations that make it truly one of a kind. On a surface level, Final Fantasy XIII-2 seems like an apology tour for all the misdeeds of 13. Beneath that, it is merely an alternate angle on the same game, one with just as many highlights and pitfalls, and one that works in tandem with the first to illuminate the value of the ideas they present. 13-2 could never change this trilogy's fate, but for the people that accepted these games for what they are instead of hating them for what they aren't, it didn't need to. I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been really surprised by how interesting this misunderstood series of games is, and I can't wait to see how it ends. Thanks for watching.